For today's lesson, I'll be presenting on the issue of cell phones and other digital devices. Um, so digital technologies can be a number of different things. I've listed some of them: laptops, tablets, cell phones, game consoles, smart boards, virtual reality and augmented reality goggles, interactive projectors, and smart boards. And you can also be used for a number of different applications with each of these devices, such as social media, email, research, augmented reality and virtual reality apps, word processing, web page creation, photography and video creation, robotics, etc. So um, these devices, when an administrator is considering whether to allow these devices, these are some things that they should probably, questions that really come to mind. So what devices, if any, may be used? How many of these devices can be used? Who is allowed to use these devices? When are these devices allowed to be used? And will students be able to utilize their own personal devices? And if so, how can schools regulate content without infringing on the privacy of students? So those are just some things that administrators should be thinking about when they're trying to make those decisions. Also, I've included to help administrators kind of think about those decisions and help them make those choices. I've included some pros and some cons. So the pros and the cons that I listed here: educational learning apps. Obviously, cell phones and digital devices give students access to tools and apps that can help them complete and stay on top of their classwork. These tools can also teach students to develop better study habits like time management and organizational skills. Another pro would be incorporating digital platforms into the lesson. If teachers incorporate digital platforms such as social media into their lessons, it may help keep students interested in class and encourage them to participate in the discussions. Another pro of digital devices is that teachers can supplement lessons with digital materials. Teachers can take advantages of cell phones and other digital devices by providing students with resources to find more information about a topic. This could include videos, news stories, online discussion groups, and more. Allowing students to access these resources in class can help encourage participation and discussion. And then my final pro that I've listed here, of the many, is providing easy access of information. By allowing students to use their digital devices to research more about a topic while having class discussions, this will stimulate further discussion and new discussions. This is especially true for current events that have not yet been covered in school textbooks. And I use digital devices for this format in my government classes. When we discuss news, they can get their laptops out or their cell phones and find stories and then use that to discuss stories. So it does create more. So anyway, I thought that should be included. All right, so the cons of allowing cell phones and digital devices. There's obviously probably more than these, but these are the main ones that came to mind. Distractions and interruptions. I think this is the one that everybody talks about. When students use their cell phones to check social media and text their friends in a class, it leads to distractions for those students as well as their peers. And this can cause disruptions in class, particularly if the teacher has to constantly be telling them to turn off their devices. Not to mention that the students aren't focusing on what they're supposed to be doing at the time. The other key issue that I thought was important to talk about was cyberbullying. With cell phones and other digital devices, bullying now goes onto the internet. Whether it happens at school or away from school, school still has some responsibility. And it's a lot harder to see it when it's not physically in front of you. And so out there on the internet, it's really hard for us to detect what's going on unless somebody happens to bring it to your attention. And so that's a concern that you have to look at. The other con that I thought was worth mentioning is the cheating aspect of it. Cell phones can be used in a number of ways. They can be used to take pictures of answers and sent to other students. They can have, if they have their phones on them, they may have answers for themselves and may be using it with the visibility set low. And so they may be using those devices to help them cheat. And so that's a major concern as well when looking at the cons. And finally, the last one I listed is one that's becoming more and more common, is the disconnect from face-to-face activities. Oftentimes you'll see students sitting beside each other, actually having a conversation with the student next to them via a text or Snapchat or something, rather than having face-to-face conversations. And face-to-face conversations are an integral part of a student's education. This is a skill that they need to have when going out into the workplace or into their the next levels of society. So I think this is important to add into that as well. So those are the pros and the cons. And the other thing we need to look at is the legal issues that go along with the use of digital devices. So if you're going to decide to use digital devices, you need to consider looking at these possible concerns as well. So restrictions on non-educational applications and inappropriate material. Is your school going to limit or restrict education applications and inappropriate material, and how will you or your school determine what is or isn't appropriate? So that's something you need to think about. Applications of K-12 digital citizenship curriculum, this would be part of that. And obviously if you're, more schools are doing this, but if you are going to consider allowing digital devices, you need to make sure that you implement a K through 12 digital citizenship curriculum to help students learn how to appropriately use these technologies and how also to protect themselves from possible threats. The next thing I have is the protection of student privacy rights. Anytime you have student data that students store on their devices, there's the concern that they need to have privacy and passwords and how you're going to set up those types of things on school laptops and school supported information. So how are you going to protect those? That's something you need to be concerned with. And the next one is confiscation of student devices. So what will be your procedures for confiscating a student phone or a digital device? How are you going to educate your teachers on the procedures for this? Those are things to think about, as well as what's the student's rights when it comes to searches of those devices as well. And so let's move to the next one. We're going to talk about some of the legal, some tips real quick, and then some legal stuff. So here's just a few tips to help you as you're kind of guiding your way through this process. Administrators should always follow the guidelines that board policies have set for regulating digital device usage. And if there's no board policy, then the administrator should develop procedures for guiding the use of the digital devices. Also, administrators should avoid banning the use of cell phones and other electronic devices by students unless there is sufficient evidence of a disruption or improper use. And although there has been very few legal cases challenging a school's right to ban the use of digital devices, it's still imperative that a district can provide evidence of the disruptions or improper use in the case that it is challenged. The next thing that I have on here is that administrators who wish to allow digital devices should develop specific guidelines that regulate the usage of these devices. This will help teachers and schools avoid inappropriate use of these devices, and it will give students guidelines for how they should be used. Next, I have administrators who ban digital devices should also include or allow exceptions in the extreme circumstances when the devices are necessary. In this way, administrators have some leeway in enforcement of extreme circumstances. You don't want a student not being able to use their cell phone if there's a school shooting to report something and then have to punish them. So that would be an example of why you would want to have that leeway in there. The next thing to think about is administrators should also make sure that the policies that guide the use of digital devices are fair. Fair policies that treat all issues the same and that do not excessively punish offenses is vital to allowing them for the use of digital devices. To help better understand some of these legal issues that digital devices create, let's now look at some of the legal cases that have been established, that establish some precedents for schools. All right, so the first case, we've talked about this in prior lessons, is the New Jersey versus TLO case. The courts ruled that the Fourth Amendment does not require schools to have probable cause or obtain a warrant prior to searching. This ruling held that schools have the right to search a student or students' belongings if there is a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed or a rule has been broken. And so this case allows schools to confiscate a student's device if it violates school rules. All right, so let's go to the next case. In the next case, this is a more recent case. We haven't talked about this one yet, but this case is Riley versus California. And in the case, the Supreme Court ruled that warrantless searches, exception follows an arrest, exist for the purposes of protecting an officer's safety and preserving evidence. Neither of which is at the issue of the search of digital data. So for this reason, the courts ruled that the search of digital data from a cell phone or digital device must be warranted to search. It can't be just because they have violated the policy, you have the right to search it. And so the courts also ruled that some warrantless searches of cell phones or digital devices might be permitted in an emergency. So when applying this to the earlier decision in the TLO case, a school leader may not search a student's data on a digital device unless they have reasonable suspicion that the data on the device violates school policy or is a danger to the student or other students. The courts, however, did allow an exemption to this rule if there is concern of an emergency, in which case the search should be allowed. So anyway, now that you've discussed the relevant cases, the pros and cons to digital devices, let's take a look at a few scenarios on how to apply this knowledge. And the scenarios you'll find on the discussion boards, and then at the end of my presentation, so I'm going to go through these scenarios real quick. And there's the references. And so that's the end of the video portion of my presentation, and we'll continue the scenarios on the discussion boards. Thank you.